So I'm going to call to order the council workshop for Monday, June 28th at 5 o'clock to be held virtually. Council, we have a resolution that's been circulated. There's a resolution to hold the public meeting without the public in attendance. Will someone from council please move that motion? Moved by Councillor Jackson, second by Councillor Hanson. Call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Are there any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Curran, second by Councillor Back. Call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Okay, Council, so really the point, we have two subjects to talk about tonight, but I'm going to guess that transportation issues as a whole are going to be discussed throughout the evening. But we're going to start first with the 3.1 Active Transportation Program Update. And I believe we have Ms. Chevalier. Are you going to be opening up the comments on this?
Your Honor, we have two topics, as you mentioned, tonight. One is being the active transportation and the other on-street parking policy. Ingrid Weisenbach is behind us. She's actually going to do the first presentation, and then we thought we would allow for discussion between the two presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, Your Worship, it's Steve Ono here.
Yep.
I'm hoping that I could maybe offer a couple of introductory comments first.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Your Worship, I just wanted to note that there's been a lot of important, significant progress so far in this term of council. In this term of council, we've had some clarity in prioritization of active transportation investments and all the supportive funding that the council has been providing. And so we've started to make some real progress. So as you noted this evening, we'll be talking about two topics, both where council has provided some guidance in 2020. The one is the active transportation file, and the other is the on-street parking policy. So the fairly ambitious active transportation plan that was proposed in the 2020 Fall Transportation Workshop was endorsed by council, and things sometimes, as you know, change quickly. And so that's why we're here. We're here to speak with you this evening about some adjustments we need to make. We've still intend, of course, to move forward with the priorities that council has identified. But we also listen very carefully to the commentary from the last workshop, fall workshop, to make sure that we engage carefully with residents, take our time, and mitigate impacts for the immediate fronting residents as we try to advance these priorities. So, for example, we've broken the Lynn Valley Road project, which was the next on the priority list, into two phases in order to deal with the relatively easier piece first, and then spend additional time working through a pilot project for the second piece, which was raised as a concern because of impacts to parking. So our staff here will be able to provide additional details on some of that this evening. We also, of course, received fairly good news with respect to grant funding for the Livable Deep Cove project. But as you know, Your Worship, that will probably require reallocation of resources in order to deliver that. And we've also had to shift priorities to align some of the complementary active transportation links within reasonable distance of the heart of Deep Cove, so that we can mitigate some of the potential additional impacts of the Livable Deep Cove project on further attractions into the heart of Deep Cove. So Ingrid, actually Nicola will be providing additional information this evening on that topic. On the on-street parking policy, both Ingrid and Nicola will also be adding some information or providing some information on how the on-street parking policy has provided staff with the necessary tools and guidance to mitigate all of those parking impacts and loads at those high demand areas in the district. And the basis for being able to be consistent or bring consistency district-wide for the use of on-street public space and provide a balance between all the different public interests that we serve with our with the public space that's within the road right-of-way. So with that, I have Nicola Chevalier here and Ingrid Weisenbach to provide you with the overall presentation. Thank you, Your Worship.
Mr. Ono?
All right, so let me see if I can get this loaded up. Okay, so can someone tell me if you can see my screen?
Yes.
Great.
Good.
Okay. So thank you, Steve and Nicola, for getting us started, and good evening, Your Worship and members of council. So the first half of this workshop, we're going to cover basically two things, which is our active transportation program for this year, as well as our longer term cycling program. There we go. So jumping right in, let's talk about this year's program first. In November, we showed you this map of 19 projects that we had planned to deliver. And I'm happy to report that the majority, 12, are actually on track to start construction this year, as you can see by where the red check marks are. The ones without the checks are projects where we've had to adjust those schedules. And I can assure you that we still will be delivering those projects. In some cases, we have to shift priorities, and in other cases, we are coordinating them with other works. An example of the latter is the crossing upgrade at Frome and Frederick with flashing lights. Between the culvert project, the new fields, the sidewalk, there's a lot going on in this small area of the district. So so this crossing upgrade will actually get moved into next year, which will allow us to coordinate with the other projects, minimizing having to redo some of the concrete work. And before I go into some of the other projects that will take longer than originally anticipated, I wanted to say that this year is one of our most ambitious in terms of active transportation. One that I'm particularly excited about is the central portion of the Spirit Trail. This project is expected to be tendered in late summer and awarded in the fall. And when combined with the work that's happening on the highway interchanges, it's going to provide a vital connection for people walking and cycling in one of the most congested areas on the North Shore. We are steadily working on delivering our cycling program, which is based on the map that we talked about at our last workshop. We're working on both phases of Lynn Valley Road, and in another part of the district, later this summer, you'll start to see the Lionsgate Village to CNV border route upgrades out there in conjunction with the paving on West 15th. As we continue to work on cycling projects, we're learning a lot. While there are design guidelines and best practices, each route we're finding is unique and has its own set of challenges and opportunities. And this is why we are refining the timeline since our last November workshop. For example, some of the projects will be accelerated, while others are being adjusted due to the shifting of priorities. One example, as Steve mentioned, is what's happening in Deep Cove. There's been increasing momentum around the Livable Deep Cove project. To ensure its success, we want to focus our resources and speed up some of the walking and cycling projects near the cove that will complement the larger project and make it a little easier for the neighborhood to walk and bike to the village. For the projects that are being rescheduled, we have a set of guiding principles. They deal with public engagement and coordinating with partner agencies. And we've decided to take on a maximum of 2 projects per year that will require significant public involvement. We've heard from council and confirmed from our experiences that a measured approach is the best approach on projects with difficult trade-offs. As an example of this, we're adjusting the delivery schedule for phase 2 of the Lynn Valley Road active transportation project to try something a bit different. We've hired a consultant to help us design and pilot a one-way configuration for the north end near Dempsey this summer, as well as collect public feedback. We want to understand how the traffic would redistribute over the network. And we also want people to try it out so that they can actually give us their opinion based on something that they've used. Another example, or a different example for multi-agency coordination, is that we're working with the Ministry of Transportation. Late last year, we learned that they had some money to advance conceptual work on Capilano Road at the highway interchange. I've had conversations with them, and they are showing a willingness to partner with us so that we can develop one design that would provide a continuous cycling lane from Ridgewood Drive all the way to the existing cycling lane south of the interchange. So by working with both partners and also creating the space that to have a more in-depth conversation on projects does require more time and a juggling of resources. Staff are moving towards a 3-year delivery schedule for many of our cycling projects and limiting the number that require extensive public engagement to 2 per year. So what does all that translate into for delivering our program? We're working with partners on several of our projects. We're working with West Vancouver to advance the important eastbound cycling link from Lionsgate Bridge to McGuire, with the ministry to deliver cycling connections under Highway 1 at Capilano Road and at Lynn Valley Road, and with the city to link Lynn Valley to Lynn Creek through Kirkstone Park and over Highway 1. We've adjusted those projects that will need additional discussion on the trade-offs, such as Lynn Valley Road Phase 2 and the cycling connection along West Queens. You'll also notice a change relating to the Spirit Trail timeline. We recently hired a consultant. Later this year, we will receive their recommendations and high-level plan for how to deliver this big project over the next 9 years. As you know, there are some technically challenging sections, such as spanning the ravine in Windridge Park, but also some interesting challenges on how to right fit the Spirit Trail through some of the residential neighborhoods. We are also shifting priorities to advance projects along Mountain Highway. We've moved the timeline on the Mountain Highway link from Arbor Lynn to Highway 1 ramps by 2 years in order to better align with the ministry's work on the interchanges. And that's this section right here, if people can see my cursor. And we also want to move up the connection on Mountain Highway between Lynn Valley Road and Arbor Lynn to better align with the paving schedule for the road. And that's this pink section here. So the result is our work plan as shown here on the map. So in conclusion, we are trying to stay nimble in order to deliver all of the projects that we have committed to in our 10-year planning period. To do so, we are adjusting timelines and resources with our finance department as the changes will affect the 5-year financial plan. Ultimately, we believe that these adjustments will benefit the program as a whole. Thank you for your time, and I will now open it up to any questions or discussion.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I had a question, sorry, the 2023 Upper Lynn Valley Road project, did you say that's now, did you say something has changed on that with the
so
Dempsey space or what?
Yeah, so this little green section between Arbor Lynn and Mountain and the Highway 1 ramps, we've accelerated by 2 years so that it's better coordinated with the ministry's work. But then this section from Lynn Valley Road down to Arbor Lynn, we are actually also, we will need to actually work with finance to pull this one forward. So originally that segment sat out further in the 2026 to 2030 timeframe.
Yeah, it's the 2023 orange piece up at the top of Lynn Valley Road that I was actually thinking about. Did you say about it tying into Dempsey for a trial? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, so we are looking to run a pilot this summer for one way between Kilmer and Dempsey in the northbound direction. That would with the idea that that would allow us to keep some on-street parking available to the residents. The other option that we are looking also at as well is running 2 ways for traffic, but that would probably eliminate most of the parking through there. So one of the things that we have heard, both from the public and from council, is we need to look at how do we address the parking in that northern section in particular. So we're trying to figure out some options that allow us to examine the trade-offs while still delivering all of the scope elements that we had committed to, which is the walking and cycling along that stretch.
So theoretically, the center line of the road will be shifted to the west, and you'll to retain the parking on the east, but it would all be done with just temporary markers.
Well, so that's the tricky part. That's why we've hired a consultant to help us figure out what that looks like in a temporary configuration. And we just brought them on board a few days ago. So we haven't even had a chance to kick that project off. But, oh, it looks like Steve has something to say, but that will be scheduled for later this summer. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Mr. Ono?
Thank you, Your Worship, if I may, thanks. So, Your Worship, as all of Council is aware, that northern section or that northeastern section of Lynn Valley Road, the properties are somewhat smaller than further west on Lynn Valley Road. There's limited space for accommodating additional parking within the private properties themselves. So there, and that area is, of course, fairly high in demand for parking with the end of the line shop and with access to Lynn Headwaters and to the pipeline bridge. So staff have been trying to brainstorm the balancing of those priorities and demands for use of the public space. And the best way to test it is we thought that we would be able to run a pilot project like Ms. Weisenbach mentioned, have a consultant provide us with some advice on what the road geometrics, so what those temporary roadway markings might have to look like in order to have traffic circulate fairly safely. And one of the options that we've come up with is, of course, one-way circulation as an alternative to two-way circulation. And we'll see then how that impacts the residents, and that way we'll be able to then receive their feedback as well as the users of the street, the ones that come for visits. And we also know that that we can predict where the traffic will likely go or disperse to, but we'll also, as part of this pilot project, monitor where it actually goes through traffic counts. And then we'll be able to report back to council on what the relative trade-offs and impacts are before making a final call on how best to balance active transportation priority cycling routes in that stretch of the road relative to the local impacts. Your Worship, thank you.
Thank you. When we looked at the 29th project, obviously the downhill vehicles are better able to match speed with traffic, and so there's less of an interaction there. I guess that would be in play for that upper portion of Lynn Valley Road as well. But just looking at this mountain highway route, and I get that this is just a line on a map, it's not actually a lane configuration yet, but who's going to be biking straight up Mountain Highway? It's so steep, and the speed that you would be biking up Mountain Highway at is, I think that'd be very difficult. maybe e-bikes, but I'm trying to imagine what kind of consumer there would be for that stretch, rather than having those people more gradually rise, like up on Arborlin or Westland Terrace, and then coming back over, rather than just going up to the sheer straight uphill grind of going up Mountain Highway.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll start, and then perhaps Ms. Weisenbach can chime in. But Your Worship, what we understand, and the limited data we currently have, is that there's the commuter cyclists. That's the most direct route into the heart of Lynn Valley, and so there is a segment of the cycling community. So not all cyclists are created equal, but there are those that use it as a primary commute route that do even now use Mountain Highway. We also know that there's a significant uptake on e-bikes, as you mentioned, Your Worship. And the other thing is that we've heard from the community survey, or through the community survey, that higher levels of protection and separation from motor vehicle traffic is very, very highly desired by anybody that wants to use a bicycle for transportation. So for all those reasons, Your Worship, Mountain Highway, despite the grade, is a very desirable route to improve. Perhaps Ingrid may have something else to add.
Yeah, I think I would just add a couple other small minor points on top of that. Is I think we have to remember that different types of cyclists are out there, like Mr. Ono said, and they want to go different places. And I've talked to several residents now along Mountain Highway that live on Mountain Highway that do want to bike, and they are encouraging us to really consider how do they get served. So that's one thing. I think too that we have to remember that, you know, as drivers, they get multiple options on where they get to drive. And I think I've heard from cyclists as well that they want those same options. And so we have to be able to provide different routes for different types of users, but also for going to different places. So this is just, it's not to say that people wouldn't take Arbor Lynn. We still will have people that want to take Arbor Lynn. We still will have people that want to take the route on the west side of the highway through Kirkstone Park and over Highway 1. So I think it's just really providing options for folks. And then one other piece I just want to mention too is that a side benefit could be, that's something that we're going to have to look into, is I've also been hearing a lot from families that walk to school along Mountain Highway. And you're probably very familiar that our sidewalks are quite narrow through that area. And so in some cases, they're pretty close to drivers that are traveling at 50 kilometers an hour. And so it's quite uncomfortable for pedestrians. So if we are also able to provide a bit of a buffer to those people walking, that's a sort of a side benefit to having cycling along this route as well.
Well, I don't necessarily know where you're going to get all the space for that, but I look forward to seeing the cutaway profile of the lanes at some point. Councillor Curran.
Thank you. My computer and internet might be actually melting down, so if I drop off, I'm in the kiddie pool with my my computer. So thank you to staff for this. I do want to acknowledge, you know, the work that we have done, and also the difficulty in transforming our mobility system in a short period of time. I understand that it's not a small or easy thing that we need to do, but I do feel like this lacks the urgency that's required. And I also feel like we're lacking a lot of the information that we need to be making science-based decisions that are centered in the health of people in our community, the health and safety of people, and the health of our planet, without which it doesn't matter if we have healthy people, if we don't have a healthy environment, or we can't have one without the other. So looking at the OCP goals of the baseline to the target of 2030, where we looked at 35% mode would be from trips by walking, cycling, or transit, so not getting in the car, versus the baseline. I think it's important to understand what we've done in this last decade and how we're going to accelerate that, because by 2030, this council has unanimously agreed to reduce our emissions by 45%. So I guess I'm looking for a lot more data that that council can use to inform these decisions, or to understand how staff is making these decisions in the context of mode shift. It's interesting to note that the last trip diary that TransLink does, and a question for staff will be, what's the frequency of that? Because it's been different over the years, but North Vancouver District of all the municipalities has the highest trip rate. So that means we take the most trips of anywhere in the region. And so obviously active transportation, walking, cycling, transit are all ways to reduce those car trips, and I'm just not seeing the level of urgency and like a climate emergency response to this. And so I wonder a couple practical things that could happen if this could go back to staff and actually align it with SEEP so that we understand how exactly these are aligning. SEEP indicates that the most effective thing we can do is my computer, is to reduce the number and length of single occupancy car trips in the district using parking fees, bicycle facilities, and transit subsidies, et cetera. So we've identified that as the biggest impact that we can have. And I'm not sure that this, I don't believe that this delivers this yet. So I would be interested in staff speaking a little bit about that data. This has all caused me to reflect on how necessary it is to really get more prescriptive with our SEEP plan, because it's a 30-year plan. And I think 30-year plans are not effective in a climate emergency. We need to be looking at things much more frequently, and we need to have measures of success, like how are we doing on it? So I think that's really important. And I also just want to challenge the difficult trade-offs. Like, I understand, I think what that boils down to is we've built transportation systems that aren't compatible with human health or environmental health, and we rapidly need to change those. And we have a society that's addicted to cars, and we prioritize convenience over health. And so I think that those trade-offs, we need to do a better job as council to empower staff to have more confidence to do what science requires. And I don't think we're there. So I'm a bit frustrated, and it's not at staff. I appreciate the challenges that you face, but I'm wondering how we can really accelerate these actions because we're nowhere close to achieving targets as far as I can tell. Thanks.
Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Forbes. There you go.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm on my phone because my internet seems to be going in and out. It's going, even my reception on my phone is going in and out right now. I just had a few comments, and I was thinking what you were saying about Mountain Highway. And given that I live between Mountain Highway and Lynn Valley Road, I'm on Mountain Highway every day. And I just want to agree with you that I have yet to see more than one or two bicyclists coming up Mountain Highway, but I do see them going down. And a comment about widening the sidewalks. I agree that the sidewalks should possibly be wider because they are quite narrow, especially for the school, for Eastview and the kids, and if they're walking with their parents. I'm not in favor, I really am not in favor of taking that all the way up Mountain Highway with bike lanes for two reasons. One is if you push out the sidewalks to make the pedestrians safer, there's not enough room there. You've got buses going up and down there. Even though it's illegal, you have construction vehicles going up and down there. So they're pretty wide and they take up a good deal of the road. So I don't think you can squeeze anything more into at least the upper part up to Mountain Highway, Mountain Highway to Lynn Valley Road. So that would be one of my concerns right there is the safety of the pedestrians if you're going to try and squeeze too much in there. And just a general comment I wanted to make, and I'm glad we're having this workshop, is that I'm still having people call me about 29th. And, you know, I drive 29th almost daily too. And I'm just, you know, some things I didn't see fully in the first place, but I have since seen. Is there any chance of reviewing the stats on how many cars and how many bikes are on that road? Because now we are looking at parking on one side of a busy street. So I'd just like to get some more data behind how efficient that is. I'd also like to find out when the city of North Van is going to do their half of 29th Hill. And I'm a bit nervous about this discussion in Upper Lynn Valley. Again, we may have built for automobiles, but you go to downtown Vancouver now because they've done a lot of reconstruction. So they can widen the sidewalks, they can put in the bike lanes, and they still have ample space for cars. North Vancouver wasn't built that way. Some of our streets have no sidewalks, and by the time you put in a sidewalk, there's certainly going to be no room for a bike lane. So, or else it's a bike lane and not a widened sidewalk. I mean, you're going to have a trade-off on that. So, you know, I know we've made a commitment to biking. I just think we need to look at the roads and how much they can actually handle. Are they wide enough? What will it cost to widen them? Can we widen them? Does that mean we have to buy some space from people on the side of some of these roadways to make it wider? Those are just some of my comments for now. Thank you.
Ms. Weisenbach, can you address any of the questions about that Councillor Forbes raised?
So I think what I heard that I can comment on is East 29th. I know we're looking at Lynn Valley Road to see how we can do things differently than we did on East 29th. And that will help us inform if we need to make any changes on East 29th. So more to come on that. We are in the process of collecting data. I do know we're working on the staff report that we should be getting out to you shortly on just some information about the loading zones and some other pieces that were coming out of the last workshop that we had with council from a couple of years ago. So we will have an update. Not a lot of data yet because we do like to see several years worth of data, and we're still in a pandemic. So we are collecting it though, so we can start to see if there's any trends and be able to report that out to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Can you hear me okay? I know I was having microphone trouble last time, so. Does it work okay? Okay.
Yeah, you just have to talk loud still, but it's good.
I guess I got a couple comments here. First, I'd like to lend my voice to everything that Councillor Kern said. I know it seems, and obviously not, I don't put this on staff like Councillor Kern said. I think there is a need for a lot more urgency here. And what I would like to do and reiterate what Councillor Kern asked for is looking at which routes do we need to complete on what timeline to achieve that mode shift in the next 9 years. And really, I think, you know, that mode shift comes from our OCP, which is in 2011, and the Community Energy and Emission Plan likely accelerates that mode shift quite significantly. So I know right now, I think we've got the bones, the skeleton of a great plan here, connecting the town centers, connecting the major places of population, of services, of jobs, connecting many of the commuter routes. You know, still a little bit of work to do on connecting, you know, a lot of these major population areas to local schools in a safe way. But I would like to see staff come back with an analysis, not just based on you know, what routes we are planning and the timeline for those, but a lot more kind of evidence on these are the ones that are going to get us to our mode share goals and hopefully beyond the ones that were in our 2011 OCP the most efficiently, and that we're going to prioritize our investments based on meeting those goals that we've committed to. The other, I'll add some comments to the Mountain Highway Lynn Valley discussion, since I do I ride both an acoustic bicycle or non-electric bicycle and an electric bicycle between Lynmore and Lynn Valley probably 8 to 10 times a week, sometimes twice a day or 3 times a day. And Mountain Highway, aside from being terrifying to ride up for an average cyclist, is actually probably, at least from my experience, one of the lower grades, because Kirkstone you're flat along Arborland until you hit Kirkstone, and then you're right up to the top, or you're flat along Arborland till you go up Hoskins, and then you're right to the top. And those grades are quite extreme, far steeper than Mountain Highway on either Kirkstone / 21st, Hoskins, than they are on Mountain Highway. Mountain Highway, you kind of gradually get up around the corner and then slowly up to the top. And there's another route in between where you can kind of sneak up between Kirkstone and Mountain Highway, which again, you still got those steep grades. So either way, I don't see that that grade being much different based on the route you take up to Lynn Valley. And I would tend to agree with staff here, is that this is a direct route. It provides for those living west of Mountain Highway and close to the east of Mountain Highway, a very direct route up and down, and it connects to the different, well, at least the Eastview School and other locations along the way. So I'm supportive of seeing that route move forward. And especially for some of the things that were mentioned in terms of the sidewalks. Walking on the east sidewalk on Mountain Highway is also a terrifying experience, because people do not drive 50 kilometers an hour. Even the buses and the large trucks that are coming up drive much faster, and there's absolutely no separation or distance between the very narrow sidewalk and the curb lane going up Mountain Highway. So I think that improvements along that stretch would benefit a lot of people and make it feel a lot more comfortable and a lot safer for transit users getting off of the bus, getting on and off of the bus, kids and their parents walking to school at Eastview and other locations. So I think that's a good priority to be focusing on. But another comment, I think the 3-year rolling program, I really like that. I know that's a comment I've made a number of times in the past, is doing our design, doing our consultation and our planning, our design / consultation and our construction on a 3-year cycle. That means we've always got different projects ready to go for different grant opportunities to fit into the financial plan. I think that's great that we're on that timeline. But generally, obviously looking to align this plan, like Councillor Curran said, with the goals and the outcomes that we've identified and committed to. And so I'd like to see some more information on that, whether this plan as it stands, how does it get us to those goals?
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Bond. Next speaker I have is Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, staff, for this presentation. And I won't try and repeat some of the comments that have been made, but I too tend to agree with Councillor Curran's comments and Councillor Bond in terms of which areas are going to give us the biggest impact on mode shift. But I wanted to just comment on a couple specific areas. One being Main Street, sort of Phibbs Exchange to the city of North Van border there, Park and Tilford. It's one of the ugliest sections of cycling infrastructure on the North Shore, if not one of the worst. So wanted to know kind of where the improvements for that area will happen as it relates to Phibbs Exchange upgrades and whatnot. And then I also wanted to ask about Dollarton, because that's been pushed out, I see, because of we wanting to tie it all into what's happening in Deep Cove. But is there an opportunity to do some improvements along Dollarton before we do the whole project? But yeah, the other comments were made that I agree with. In terms of Mountain Highway, I think it's I commute that way as well. I don't go up Mountain Highway just because it's not a safe route at all to ride up. And as Councillor Bond pointed out, to try and get up 20th is very much a challenging route to go. So I actually avoid it altogether and take the Spirit Trail to break it up. But if there was a direct route up Mountain Highway, I think it would appeal to a large of those commuter cyclists on a daily basis. So I am in support of that particular project, but just wondering if you could comment on Main Street and Dollarton.
Ms. Weisenbach?
Sure, thank you. Yes, we hope to start to obtain a consultant later this fall to help us start figuring out how do we connect Harbor to the bridge at Lynn Creek there. And so we have aligned the timeline. Right now, what we're hearing out of the city is that they're looking at doing some project on that bridge around 2024. So we're trying to align our project in with theirs so that we can connect up in the westbound direction. But it is pretty tight. There's some high-powered lines. There's some trees. So we really have to figure out how to thread the needle through that section.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
And with regards to Dollarton, sorry.
Oh, Dollarton?
Oh, so part of, I don't know, maybe Steve, no, you might be better positioned, but in terms of the Spirit Trail, only a small portion is expected to go on Dollarton. There might be some other projects in the works, but as far as the Spirit Trail goes, it's really only going to cross over a short piece, and then it wanders through some neighborhoods after going through Kate's Park.
Okay, so there are no planned improvements for Dollarton itself, really, beyond Spirit Trail.
Not on our plan at this time, no.
Okay.
Mr. Ono, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yes, Your Worship, if I may.
Please.
So a few things, I guess. The first thing is a question of prioritization. So if all of you are familiar with how narrow and tight the grades are along Dollarton Highway. So the crossfall is really extreme. The road that's available there right now is quite narrow. There's hardly any shoulder in a lot of places. And so as far as the expense of building something there versus what we prioritize so far. So that goes to the question about analysis and data-based prioritization. Your Worship, you're correct. A lot of the prioritization we've done at this point is based on our own hypotheses about where we think we can get the biggest shifts. So the first thing I'll say is within the guidelines of the OCP, what I do like about the OCP and the idea of having a densified built form within town centers is you all know that's the quickest and easiest, most powerful tool you have to shorten trips. So if you put residences adjacent to services, businesses, recreation, then you have a chance of actually having people eliminate a single occupant vehicle trip and in favor of maybe a walking trip or a very short bike trip. And if we provide the supporting end of trip infrastructure, so secure bike parking or maybe change facilities or whatever at those locations where there's services, then it actually gives people some encouragement to use that other mode. And also to maybe restrict parking in those areas so that it's more challenging to park. So the first thing, the OCP and those town center plans are going to go a long ways. I think you'll see when your town centers actually get built out that the mode shift is going to be significant. The second thing I'll say is that the priorities we have for connecting between centers. So from the 2017, I believe, report, and it was actually, I think, from the previous council when Councillor Blonde had brought a motion. We've been working to that end to try and improve connections between centers. And in order to collect data along the various routes, it's actually really hard to do it until we actually have some dedicated separated routes in order to lay down things like counters, because until you have those separated routes or separated lanes for bikes, the counters get thrashed basically by motor vehicles, or the data gets skewed by motor vehicles. So we are ramping up our data collection for the bike usage as we can expand our bike lane network and our multi-use path network. So all of it's going to come together, and in a lot of cases, I really believe it's going to come together fairly quickly once we start getting, as someone's mentioned here, the backbone together. Then the last thing I'll say is the other priority areas that I think in the previous council had been identified was at the near the bridgeheads and near the highway crossings, so Lynn Valley Road, for example. So in the background, staff has been pushing really hard with the Ministry of Transportation and Highways to try to get some of those improvements moving forward at those pinch points. And so I think Ms. Weisenbach mentioned that we have made headway with them so that we're going to get a really bad pinch point addressed at Capilano Road and at Lynn Valley Road. And of course, you already know that there's been a lot of progress made for significant connections at the Second Narrows interchanges. Once all that construction work is done, even now, when you go through the Fern Street area and the Keith Road area, the crossings of the highway and the Mountain Highway interchange are vastly improved compared to what it was just a few years ago. It all works really well with the new Keith Road Bridge. So there's lots of pieces coming together fast. And I think then we'll be able to collect that data in order to be able to provide the information that you want us to provide to you for going forward. Your Worship, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ono. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. I won't repeat much of what's been said, which I agree with. I'm on the side of increasing resources and shortening the timelines, creating a greater sense of urgency, as has been said by some of the speakers who have come before me. I think when it comes to cycling and changes in behavior around cycling, it's a bit of a chicken and egg challenge, because until there's a certain level of infrastructure around cycling, it's not going to be widely attractive. And I think it's probably hard to gauge the appetite for cycling in the absence of a more complete cycling network. And I do believe in the age of electric bikes that an efficient, well-planned and well-constructed cycling network could really make a big difference. And I suppose I don't need to say that because we all have consensus on that. My concern, and thank you for the staff presentation, obviously, and I don't need any criticism of anyone, except to say when I read the report, the word that stands out is delay. We're going to be not moving quite as quickly as we hope to, and the pace at which we were hoping to move was, in my view, perhaps not all that quick to start with. And I bring this around to Seymour, the area where I know best. When I look at the map, it looks as if it's going to be quite a while before we really have any kind of meaningful cycling options in Seymour that would really open up a new way of life for us. So I'll leave it at that. Anything that can be done to speed it up is what I think we need to be doing. And my vote, along with others who have spoken before me, would be in favor of greater urgency and greater resources being dedicated to this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Kern.
Thanks. I just wanted to echo what Steve talked about with land use. Of course, we can't ever talk about transportation without talking about land use. But I want to reflect on what it feels like to ride a bike in our community or to walk in our community in so many places, and ask if we accept how it feels, which is that it feels unsafe. And it feels like the people who are really trying to improve their own health and the health of the community by picking other modes of transit or transportation, we make it really, really hard. And You know, I get frustrated frequently riding around here because I mostly feel unsafe. And I think one of the best gifts we can give to the future, which is hopefully why we're all here, is to create a community that is safe and that people can move in ways that are safe. And there's no way, you know, so that just that framing around health, I think, is so important. And so, yeah, I guess I'm not sure. This is just echoing a little bit of what Councillor Hanson was saying. I'm not sure if the 2012 strategy that we had was ambitious enough. I'm not sure if this, and then to delay that is concerning. So I mean, I'm wondering maybe staff could comment on what, if we said we need to, you know, we need to mode shift this much, which I don't believe we know, because I think we're operating under a 35% from our 2030, which has we've changed the targets. And we want to see exactly how we're going to get to, well, as best we can, how we're going to get there. Like, this is an emergency. We need to respond rapidly. We need to mode shift. How do we get there? Using science and evidence and, you know, basing it in health. And I don't look at roads, I look at space, and I think, how does that space best improve people's lives? And we're just not, I think we're too limited in our thinking. And I understand staff and council's fear because the elephant in the room is parking, right? Like, we have created systems that people feel entitled to pollute. And we have created social norms around that where there's actually social license to pollute. And I think that needs to change. And I hope that it can. I think everyone has great ideas. And I look forward to hearing them, but I'd really love this to be ratcheted up quite a lot.
Yeah, so just my own comments on that. I think there's some assumptions out there of build it and they will come. And the problem is, yes, if you build a new bike lane through many areas, you will see the number of people using it go up slightly. But as someone who lives in Seymour, where we have had a bike lane in place for 25 years, at least, I think it's probably about 30 years ago that the bike lanes went in on Mount Seymour Parkway. The number of commuter cyclists is next to nothing. The vast majority of the people that are using the parkway where I live are people that are out for recreation. The numbers of people go way up on a summery, sunny evening, but in the morning commute out, there's only a handful of people moving by bikes. And on when it comes to a Sunday morning, it's packed. I have to wait to turn out of my driveway sometimes because there's so many people on the bikes. But that's on a Sunday morning. And it's not moving commuter trips off of the bridges, off of our main roadways. It's adding a really great recreational option. Now, I'm very supportive of us making a strong commitment to active transportation. But it has to be strategic and it has to apply our resources in a way that makes sense. And so I think that it's very important for us to be prioritizing which ones are going to give us the biggest bang for the buck, as was stated, but also recognize that people just aren't there yet as far as willingness to get on a bike, ride across town, maybe there's no shower infrastructure at their workspace. Maybe there's another piece of the puzzle missing. Maybe it's just simply because the rain that we have through 200 days of the year in most of the area makes it so that people don't feel like it's going to fit with their lifestyle. And so when I hear us say, we got to spend more resources, we got to divert resources in order to make this happen, we got to take over the road space and do this, I go, well, yes, but we have to be strategic with the limited resources we have. Active transportation is a bunch of things. It's improving our pedestrian connections, our cycling connections, but also our bus connections. And I think that you're going to get a much bigger bang for your buck by improving our bus connections through the area than by putting bike lanes in areas where only 1% of the riders are potentially going to be skilled enough or strong enough to be able to go to some of those spaces. As a resident of Mount Seymour Parkway, I can tell you that just because you have it doesn't mean that people are making the mode shift in that space. And so I see the next speaker is Councillor Curran.
To keep speaking, but that was just on from before.
Okay. Next speaker is Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just listening to your comments, and I do agree with some of what you're saying. But I do think when you talk about build it and they will come, there's lots of success stories that can be pointed to as well. I was just reminded of one that I've mentioned in the past too, but that's the Burrard Street bike lane, which when it was built, there was all kinds of pushback from residents in the city of Vancouver, and it's now one of the most well-used one in North America. Now, yeah, maybe you can't draw a direct comparison between that and Mount Seymour Parkway, but I think you can in some ways. And I think when people do feel safe, they are much more likely to want to go out and commute that way. Also, the people that are using e-bikes are largely people that were drivers mostly before. So I think that's all the more reason to be building safe bike facilities. Because these are people that, you know, are not those confident Sunday morning, maybe recreational cyclists who are going to go and, you know, climb Seymour or something like that. These are people that that are testing out life with an e-bike and maybe starting to do a bit of commuting. So for me, that's all the more reason to want to accelerate these programs.
Yep, and I'm supportive of us going in that direction. I just don't think that we can reliably say that if you build it, you're going to see a significant shift of traffic, because we haven't seen it for 30 years on the Parkway. It hasn't been a significant shift. And when you connect all the pieces, you'll have better results and maybe make it easier for people to get through. One of the challenges with the Seymour cycling route, which I know you know well, is its connection points at Second Narrows Bridge, and we're about to have some significant improvements there. But I still think that cycling still caps out at a certain number of kilometers between your home and your work that people are going to be willing to do, because you don't want to show up at work necessarily needing a shower and restart your day there. And so people are willing to go 5 kilometers, maybe 10 kilometers. But if you don't have a significant population of people and a significant source of work spaces, I just don't see you having the significant mode shift. And since so many of our people are commuting to the other side of the Second Narrows Bridge, making it a clean connection to the bridge, even just getting over the bridge. I have biked over the Second Narrows Bridge, and it is a workout. And so I just don't. Anyway, I think we agree on the principle that we're heading in that direction. What I'm just challenging is that I don't think that it's reliable that you're going to be able to predict what the mode shift is going to look like, simply based on past performance. So anyway, I see Councillor Forbes' hand.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree 100% with just about everything you've said. Just because you want a mode shift doesn't mean you're going to get it as fast as you want it. I have to emphasize what I said before. The District of North Vancouver was not laid out like a grid system. It was not laid out with wide roads. And it, as I said, it doesn't even have sidewalks. But I always seem to hear the safety of the bicyclists, and I want everybody to be safe. Now, if our sidewalks aren't safe, which is where more people will be than biking at the moment, I think you cannot have bus transportation, car transportation, bicycle lanes, and wider sidewalks all on a lot of our streets in North Vancouver. And that's going to require financial resources. If that's what we're looking at, in order to get all of those things, we're going to be looking at spending a lot more money. And there's going to be some places, like Mr. Ono just said, that on Dollarton, there isn't even an edge. So it may not ever be possible, whether we want to spend the resources or not, to be able to widen some of our roads. I think it's great, active transportation, but you have to be practical too, and you have to look at what you've got. We're not the same as, we're not flat like the Netherlands or Sweden. Well, we're not flat like a lot of European countries where it works, it all works, and it's very easy to widen streets. It's not on the district. I drive quite often over to Vancouver for my dog. The hospital is over there, and I just sit amazed down around Main Street and Second and in that area. They've widened all those things up, and I just look at it and I look at how big the sidewalks are and how well there's room, tons of room for people to walk, to bike. The roads are wider. It all works good. And then I think, well, why don't I think this works as good in North Van? And we just don't have the space. So either we're going to have to recognize we're going to also need financial resources if we're going to widen roads and to make everybody safe. And we're also going to need maybe to buy private land when we're doing that. And I also want to emphasize what you said, Mayor, too, that I don't know what the percentage is, but it's certainly, I don't know, 20% bike ridership. I'm not sure what the number is. But then if you cut that down to who actually is going to be biking up Mountain Highway, it's going to be the commuters. And then that percentage comes way down, like you said, maybe 1%. So the idea is we need to make everybody safe, and we need to make the routes available to as many of the cyclists as possible, not just the dedicated, perhaps younger, but definitely healthier biker, but all of the cyclists. So those are my concerns, that we seem to be almost rushing this so fast and we don't even have data. I think this is going to be a very expensive thing for us to change the mode here. And that's acceptable to me because we'll work it through on stages and plans and things like that, I'm sure. But I think that we're rushing without having data and making a decision that's going to change lots of the structure of the streets in North Vancouver is going to be really challenging. And I just think that we need to get the data before we make the decisions. And I hear all of this all the time about we made a commitment, we made a commitment. Yes, we did make a commitment. And yes, I wanted the streets to be as healthier than they were before. But I also think we have to be realistic. We have to base it on data and statistics, not assume or not guess, and certainly not do things where the payback as far as safety for all people, all of our citizens, isn't worth it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forbes. Mr. Ono, you had a response?
Thank you, Your Worship. On the question of data, actually, there's a few things. I'll go back first to Mount Seymour Parkway. So it's important to keep in mind that the bike facility on Mount Seymour Parkway is built to a fairly old standard. So if I remember the cross section correctly, the bike lane is a single line painted lane that's a meter maximum, and in some cases less than a meter wide. And the legal posted vehicle speed there, I think, is 60 kilometers per hour, but the numbers that we actually see in the data is quite a bit higher. So it's not a very comfortable space for sole commuter cyclists. So what I've heard anecdotally is that quite a few commuters choose to drop down to Dollarton, where the vehicle speeds are lower, rather than using Mount Seymour Parkway. The other thing is that the connections from Mount Seymour Parkway to get across to the bridge can be challenging, because choices are to use Riverside, which is or was pretty difficult, or cut along all the way to Mountain Highway. So either of those isn't really desirable if your destination is to cross the Second Narrows Bridge. on the question of data again, we are ramping up the data collection program as we get more dedicated and separated bike path in, so that we can actually lay down the counters and whatever without having them fouled by traffic. So we will be building on the data, but we overall, except for this COVID year, we're seeing a trend in gradual increases in bicycle use. What we still expect to see is, as the routes are connected and completed, that I really firmly believe that we would see the bike usage go up along those completed routes where cyclists don't wind up being stranded on a partially completed route. Thanks, Your Worship.
Mr. Stewart, I see you've joined us there.
Thank you, Your Worship. You know, I listened to this discussion. It's happened for at least a decade now.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, we're confused. And what we're confused about is whether you want to promote mobility of the North Shore or commuting to Vancouver. Because they're two different, very, very different things. And I look at this system and I think that we don't really understand the cost of it, particularly if we're catering to commuters versus people that want to get around the North Shore. And I think council needs to arrive at a spot where we're saying, you know what, the cost of this may lead us to say what we're trying to do is promote local traffic and local commuting as opposed to commuters. So I really think that, you know, we're really struggling right now because I think we're trying to do too much. We're trying to do too much in a not really a realistic timeline given the budgets we have. And that's not to say we can't increase the budgets, but I really think we need a lot more focus on what it is we're trying to achieve. And I'm very concerned, and I'm not being disrespectful to all the previous plans, but the previous plans envisioned everything. And I don't think we can achieve everything. I don't think we can achieve everything in the next 10, 15 years. And I think we need to prioritize. We can't prioritize just based on whether we're going to go from 13th to 15th or, you know, Lynn Valley up somewhere. It's really got to be around who are we trying to promote bicycle use as a alternate method of transportation. And I'm going to be really provocative and say commuting is likely the most expensive way to do that, and likely is the least supportive of some of our goals in North Vancouver, which is to take traffic off our streets that are just trying to move around the municipality. So I just add that to the conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Next speaker is Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to respond to what Mr. Ono said about getting data, that you have to get the temporary infrastructure in place before you can get the data. What I'm concerned about is that doesn't seem to be the way things have been done before. And this is no disrespect to any staff or any council member. What I'm concerned about is that it's going to be expensive. If we're going to do it, we need to base it on data and facts. And I don't want the taxpayers' money going into something so we can get the data out and then we decide, oh, the data doesn't back it up. And so then we have to remove everything. We still have a lot of people that are not happy at 29th. We have some people that like it. We have some people that don't like it. That's why I keep asking for data on 29th, because it wasn't cheap. So I just also want to emphasize that we need to be practical, realistic. And I agree with what Mr. Stewart just said too, that I think we're a little scattered on I think we all agree on where we're trying to go. The question is, how practical is it for the District of North Vancouver? Can our budget do it? And is this timeline, even though we want it, is it realistic? And what is the audience that's going to take up on this? Because we're always going to have, for a demographic that is either older or has medical conditions or has big families, that are always going to use cars. And I've said that before. You're not going to get rid of all cars off the roads. You're just going to, the more you squeeze on cars, and I'm not saying that that shouldn't be done, but what I'm saying is that if you try to do it too fast, you're not going to get there. And you might end up having more pushback than you would if you just handle it with a proper transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Bond.
Well, I've kind of missed these opportunities at workshops for us to get into discussions deeply on subjects. I just wanted to make a couple more comments. I think Mr. Ono addressed one of them, that Mount Seymour Parkway is probably a terrible example of a bike facility to be comparing over time. I think something that you might look at better, and unfortunately I don't think we have an example in the district yet, but if you look at some of the infrastructure in the city of North Vancouver, either along Keith Road or along the Spirit Trail in a number of areas. The upcoming work on Esplanade would be a great example to see what happens when you take a street that is prioritized for through vehicle traffic, like at high speeds and high volumes like Mount Seymour Parkway is, and add in elements that allow people who are walking and biking along that corridor to feel safe. So I think those are some great things to look at. You know, on the comment about data, and I think I emphasize with staff here, because we don't actually have good facilities in order to collect good data to make decisions in this standpoint in the District of North Vancouver, because we haven't built them, and people don't choose not to bike as much as they would like to, or choose not to walk as much as they would like to, because it's unsafe and it's not convenient and it's unpleasant to do so. So we do have to look at other jurisdictions where they do have data nearby, comparable jurisdictions, and then extrapolate from there. And I think that's why our plan is a good plan, and investing in it makes a lot of sense. You know, I think you know, I think we keep coming back, like Mr. Stewart mentioned, to the concept of priority. And, you know, it's important to put that in context. When this community was built, it was built in such a priority that any home, any business in every neighborhood, you could drive a vehicle from that front door with a minimum amount of any type of other mode, walking, maybe walking from the door to your vehicle, to any other place in the entire community. And that was the priority that we made, and that was the choice that was made at the time. And now what we're looking at is allowing some neighborhoods and some front doors to be able to get to a few other ones in a safe way. And when we talk about prioritizing and being practical, I think it's important to recognize that the status quo is that for people that aren't in their vehicles, it's unsafe and not convenient and unpleasant. And if practicality means allowing those people to maintain in their unsafe, unpleasant, inconvenient ways of getting about, then I don't think that's very practical at all. So Mr. Stewart made an interesting point about commuting or traveling around, and it's both. A good facility should allow you to travel in the way that you choose, whether you're on a commuting trip or whether you're on a local trip, you know, and it should be direct, just like it is if you were traveling in a motor vehicle. Whether you're driving from Mary Little from your house up to Parkgate Mall, or whether you're going downtown, it's the same road, it's the same facility, and it should be convenient for either trips. And you know, I do think We do think about commuting. I think maybe I'm along the same lines as Mr. Stewart here. We do think about commuting a lot in terms of potential trip reductions to reduce traffic, but I think thinking about it more holistically is ways to get around, and whether a person may still choose to drive for their commute if it's long, or for whatever reason they choose to. But I think giving people the opportunity to choose a different mode for different trips is what we're trying to get here, to reduce the total number of vehicle trips, not a certain specific type of trip in a vehicle, but the total number. And whether that means you're driving downtown to work and then coming home, maybe you do your shopping on the way home, but maybe in the evening you ride your bike down to Deep Cove for dinner, or maybe you bring you walk your kids to school in the morning before you go to work. I think enabling more of those choices in a safe way is really what we're trying to do with the plan. So I don't think it's overly ambitious. It might cost money, it might cost a lot of money, but it's certainly less expensive than the status quo should we continue along the path that we're on. So I think we're probably going to have a long workshop, but thanks for letting me have those comments.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes. Sorry, you're muted, Councillor Forbes.
Sorry, that was from before.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Curran.
I just had to chime in on Mount Seymour Parkway. I've never felt safe on Mount Seymour Parkway, so I don't feel like that is fair to say that people commute or don't locally versus regionally, or commuting for work versus pleasure, because I think it's unsafe regardless of how you're riding on the parkway. Like, you're riding right next to vehicles that are traveling 70 kilometers an hour. I don't know how anyone would ever consider that to be acceptable or safe. These are things I ask myself when I'm riding my bike, because it certainly doesn't feel safe. And then I think it is really important, and Steve Ono talked about this, but we are talking about systems. So certainly cycling and walking and on-demand transportation and big transformative things that are going to happen in the transportation system in this next decade, I truly believe they're going to. So it's hard for people to imagine the future of mobility, because I don't think we could do a good job of really sharing and envisioning a future where you can move around the community that you live in to do all of the things you need to do safely. And in doing so, you're not causing harm to anyone else either. So I just think it's about priorities. It's about what we value, and that we have to transform our systems. And I think there's lots of practical ways that we can do that. And I think that's what we're getting at, and it doesn't have to be an either or. We need to shift every single system when it comes to mobility. So it's not just cycling, not just walking. It's and. It's not an or. So hopefully staff, I definitely heard strong support from 4 of us. I know workshops are challenging because there's no real direction given, but I would be interested to see what the action out of this workshop is planned to be, especially in regards to aligning with SEEK.
Okay, thank you very much. And I see no further speakers from council, and I do believe we have a member of the public that wanted to speak to this item. So still seeing no speakers from council, I'm going to go to Don Piercy.
Your worship and council, thank you for taking time. I'll be very brief. Hub is very pleased to see the prioritized plan. We would appreciate that if some more resources could be allocated to keep it moving a little faster, we would greatly appreciate that. We also agree that the priorities, as several speakers have mentioned, should be focused around areas that are dense in both population and in destinations. And that doesn't mean just cycling to work. We feel that a lot of short trips are where people shop, where they go to recreation and things like that. And so we like the trend in the revised cycling priorities of focusing on those dense areas which are around the bridgeheads, the connections to and from them, between the town centers, especially around the Lynn Valley area where we have much more density. The last area I'd like to sort of point out is the town centers aren't actually considered part of this transportation plan because they have their own separate plans, and they have everything in them seems to be dependent on redevelopment. And one of those critical areas is between basically Keith Road and all that lovely new infrastructure that the highways have built, and down at Main Street and the bridge. How do you get there? Well, you go down Lower Mountain Highway, which is terrifying to go on. In fact, and there is a plan for redevelopment to put bike lanes down there. One piece of it is done, 2 of them are being built, and there's another 21 sections that will be necessary to complete that haven't even started, or I don't know if they're even approved. So we have a big hole that we've created gaps where our town centers. Lynn Valley Road, just north of the mall, is another area like that. And I would like to see them included in the transportation plan. So those are just my quick points I'd like to raise. One final one is that escarpment. I have looked at all the various ways of getting from Second Narrows up to Lynn Valley. I've done them on a graphics system, and that escarpment still has to be climbed. And unfortunately, you're going to face a steep hill on every single route that I have tried to work out. Mountain Highway is one of the medium ones on that list. There is just no easy way to get up basically to Lynn Valley, short of going way over and coming up 3rd Street on the other side of the city. Thank you for taking time to listen.
Thank you. Corey Cost, can you hear me?
Yes, Your Worship, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome. You've got 3 minutes to address council.
Okay, I'm going to be pretty blunt. I'm sorry, it's the way the whole thing came out. The only way to move people safely during these times especially is via the private automobile. And I can tell you, if you look at my share screen here, I guess I can't do that, but anyway, that the conclusion is that public transportation has fallen 40 to 50% and not shown any signs of going back, whether it's the C-Bus, the SkyTrain, whatever mechanism. People are leaving public transportation in droves. Cycling is only good if you're in good health and good capability. It's not for seniors. We have an aging population. I hate to see that killing people to save the planet is going to be your optimal solution. I think that's not acceptable. The 2011 OCP did not account for climate change like this and pandemics at the same time. I'm sorry, but to me, 4 members of council are not living in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cost. Okay. Well, thank you very much, council. We'll move on to the next item, which is item 3.2. This is the on-street parking policy update. Ms. Chevalier.
Great. Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Can you see that? I seem to have lost seeing you, but hopefully you can see me. Can you hear me?
I can see and hear you,
Okay,
yes. And I can
perfect.
see your slides as well.
Okay, I'm gonna go blind here. So we're gonna shift modes a little bit, but and talk a little bit more about parking, on-street parking and cars, which feels a bit of a shift. But as I've been listening to this discussion, I think it really does come down to how we use our roadways. So it does tie in quite nicely. So just to get started here, the purpose of this presentation is to update council on the on-street parking policy that was adopted in November 2020. And while there's still a lot of work to be done to mitigate parking pressures near some of our busy parks and town centers, this policy really has been a critical first step. And just as a reminder, prior to adoption, the approach to on-street parking restrictions was very ad hoc, and it didn't always find the right balance between all of the various needs and goals. And so now, as we're well into a very busy summer season and parking is again top of mind in many areas, we just wanted to review with you why it is recommended that we continue to apply the principles in the policy and not return to an ad hoc approach. Okay, now I have to. There we go. Okay. So this is just reviewing the goals in the policy, and that's the first thing that it does. It clarifies the important goals that we are trying to achieve when it comes to providing access to on-street parking. And as you are well aware, there are many competing needs and interests, and it is often really tricky to find that right balance. By adopting these goals, the policy recognizes that it is important to consider both the livability of a neighborhood, as well as the needs of other residents and of the businesses that rely on access to on-street parking. As you know, we regularly receive complaints from residents living in busy areas who are concerned about parking congestion, and they want priority access to the parking on their street. However, when we don't find that appropriate balance, we also hear from district residents who are frustrated about the lack of parking near trailheads and parks. And we also hear from businesses who rely on street parking for their customers or for their staff. So it's also not always about making parking more convenient for these people. It can also be about discouraging car ownership and encouraging more sustainable modes of transportation. And so by keeping all of these goals in front of mind, it helps to ensure that access to parking is fair and that it supports the vibrancy, livability, and the sustainability of the community. So the second thing the policy does is outlines the regulatory tools that we are able to use to try to balance the different goals. So this is achieved by applying the tools thoughtfully in ways that manage parking availability to suit our goals. Typically, these tools are best used in combination. And for example, it may be appropriate to designate pay parking for visitors at a busy park or in a town center, and then if it's needed, provide resident exempt parking restrictions on the surrounding residential streets. In this case, doing one without the other may aggravate the situation. So finding the appropriate combination requires data collection to understand the parking supply and demand and to tailor the restrictions accordingly for each situation. On the spectrum of tools that we have available, the most versatile one is definitely pay parking, and it is particularly helpful when demand for parking varies significantly, depending on the season, the time of day, or even day of the week. Or it's also useful when you want to encourage more sustainable modes of transportation. It allows for way more flexibility than a fixed sign. It allows us to adjust parking rates and durations to match demand. And pay parking is something that we are currently gaining experience with through the pay parking pilot that just launched in Lynn Canyon Park. And if that is successful, it may be something that we should consider expanding to other busy areas of the district. So this slide is just a reminder that we are in the midst of a process and that the on-street parking policy has simply laid the foundation for the important work ahead. As I mentioned before, the policy was adopted. Parking restrictions were applied really inconsistently and usually without looking at all of the competing needs or sustainability goals. So thanks to the direction provided by Council through a series of workshops last year, we now have a clear framework to better manage our on-street parking demand and availability. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but we've also made a lot of progress since the policy was adopted. We've launched the pay parking pilot, as I mentioned, in Lynn Canyon Park. We also recently hired a transportation demand management coordinator who's going to help us to take a more holistic approach. We're also reviewing a handful of formal requests for parking restrictions through the lens of the policy, and we're developing a process for collecting the data needed to determine the appropriate tools for each situation. So over time, we will also need to review those areas that had resident parking only or RPO regulations installed prior to policy adoption. The cost, the eligibility criteria, and even the enforceability of some of those areas varies widely. And as resources allow, we plan to look at how to bring these in line with the current policy direction. In the meantime, ensuring that any new restrictions that we implement are in accordance with the policy will help to ensure a more balanced and consistent approach going forward. And this is my last slide. So just again, in summary, the on-street parking policy provides staff with clear council-endorsed goals and tools that are needed to guide the implementation of parking restrictions in a way that is fair and contributes to a thriving and sustainable community. It will allow staff to start to plan how to gradually bring previously implemented restrictions into compliance. And with that, Your Worship, I will hand things over to you for discussion and questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Council, don't see any questions yet. Councillor Bond?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think we have discussed this rather recently, so I appreciate a quick update. Do we have any early information back from the Lynn Canyon pay parking pilot on how that's working?
Chevalier?
Yeah, Your Worship, I can answer that. It's too early to have data on how that's going. It really just launched in the last month or two. Also, the bridge is still closed due to COVID. And so it's not really representative right now. So we are collecting data. We did collect data prior to it launching as a sort of a baseline, and we'll be collecting it regularly over the 2-year period. And as soon as we have anything meaningful, we'll report back.
Okay, great, thanks.
Next speaker I have, Mr. Ono, you had a comment?
I just wanted to add one small thing to the response regarding Lynn Canyon pay parking. So in conjunction with the Lynn Canyon pay parking, of course, we expected that some people would avoid using the parking lot. So we also rolled out some tighter parking restrictions near Lynn Canyon Park. And what we did, of course, and it was generally in accordance with the policy in the on-street parking policy, and that we were aiming to balance livability in the neighborhoods with the availability or access to an attraction such as Lynn Canyon. And we did, of course, get a mixed reaction from the residents out there. So some residents, of course, liked or appreciated the restrictions, but they didn't appreciate having to pay for an annual parking pass and those kinds of. So we're again trading off between the different priorities or goals that were outlined in the on-street parking policy. The other thing that we are aware of, and this may be, it's been a strange year, 2020 and 2021 with COVID. So it looks like there's a lot more usage of the east parking lot, so the one across on the other side of Lynn Canyon. But on the other hand, I think almost every trailhead is seeing a lot of demand. So it may be just that's driving that additional usage or displacement over to that east parking lot, or not. It could be directly related to the Lynn Canyon pay parking. And I understand that the Lynn Canyon pay parking lot is fairly well used, and that we did get a fairly good uptake on the annual resident passes for the pay parking lot. Thank you, Worship. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Kern?
Going to continue on my super popular conversation around parking. I can't actually remember if this, I know that this happened in a workshop, but did it go to a council vote eventually? Was it like on a council agenda? Probably. I always, Ingrid's shaking, yes. And I know that council doesn't mean that I support it, a majority of council might support it, but I think we just have to, come together, and this is probably one of the most divisive things in our community. And I think it comes down to, the fact that we have built communities that are not, that we have to change. And so we're trying to find ways to do that. And the one area that we are, and it's not just the district, it's the region and beyond, is we're just adding more cars. And so everyone who says that they hate traffic, I encourage them to say, I hate being traffic, because what we don't like is being in traffic. But of course we are traffic when we're in the roads. And so, you know, I think that this idea of space is something that unless elected folks ever talk about, it's always going to be perceived that and challenge the status quo, which is that roads are private when they're not. They're public space and they could be used for anything. And how do we rethink that? And how do we do that over time? I mean, I think that we hopefully can all envision communities that are not littered with cars, where there's space for people to play and to have community gardens and to do all of these things that make your life better and happier and healthier. And so one of the ways to do that is to, you know, look at how we allocate space. And so I think when I look at this, and the amount of pushback for $30 a year for a parking pass shows that we have a lot of work to do to communicate and educate folks about space in our communities and how we're going to be good. Like, I feel like we would teach children to share, and then we become adults and we stop sharing. And like, I just feel like we're always going to be at this place where it's never going to be popular to change policies. We're never going to have enough room to accommodate all the cars unless some big changes happen. So I don't, you know, I don't feel like this goes far enough. I would like to see a policy that says how do we get to no cars parked on the streets, or very limited cars parked on the streets, and how do we get there? Because I think this incremental approach is never going to get us where we are. I mean, the region is increasing. If you look at the vehicle sales, it's just increasing, right? And if we get electric cars, it doesn't solve anything for cycling safety. It doesn't solve anything for parking. So this to me is doesn't go far enough. If I did support it, I am really challenging it. I think we need to be bolder and braver. And yeah, I mean, nothing's changing, right? Like, people are mad. Staff gets yelled at. It's not pleasant for anyone. We're not having the right conversation. We have to do better. So I would actually love to hear from council and staff. How do we have these big discussions that are about the type of society that we want to live in? Because parking is so divisive, and it's so wild that we don't make big changes to make it better for everyone. It's going to be more affordable. It's going to be more healthier for the environment, all of these things. So yeah, I don't know. That's just, it's hot also. So like, there's probably a lot of ranting happening, but yeah, we got to do better. I want to hear from staff and council how we do better.
Okay. I think you're going to get some responses. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I had my hand up before Councillor Kern spoke, so this isn't in response to Councillor Kern. But, well, maybe one thing is, when you can't live in an area without it costing you $1 million plus, most people who can afford to lay out that kind of money, and I'm reflecting on Lynn Valley Town Center right now, they're not going to go without a car. So, you know, it just, you know, it's just the affordable housing ties into whether people are actually going to take public transportation, which I agree with Mr. Koss on. But the affordability of everything counts towards how much people are going to use cars, as well as things like the pandemic now. But anyway, I just wanted to say the one point back was, when you've got very, very expensive housing, usually people living in very, very expensive housing, and that's not me, but I still have a car. They usually have a car. So I don't know how we're going to get around that, but those things are tied together. I'm going to go back to a basic question here I have of staff. In the report, you talk about the 67, if a neighborhood wants restricted parking or ROP parking on their street, they need to get 67% of the abutting property owners to sign on to a petition and submit it to the district. And then it says, they submit a petition demonstrating this support to initiate the process of confirming through data collection, here we go with data again, and analysis, what, if any, restrictions are warranted. So my question is, who makes that decision and what is the criteria if you accept a petition?
Chevalier?
Yep, I can take a stab at that. So the policy does lay out that there's a few criteria. First, we need to have the 67% support before contemplating resident exempt or RPO restrictions. And then there's thresholds in there. Through data collection, we confirm that the parking demand is in fact exceeding 85% occupancy to consider RPO and 75% occupancy for resident exempt. So we've set some thresholds on that. The details of data collection are being worked out as to which time of day we're collecting and that kind of thing.
So when you say the 75% and the 85%, is that during certain times, certain days, over a certain period?
Yes, the policy speaks to 75% occupancy required. What we're doing right now is developing with the petition, and prior to going to collect data, we're looking at the particular situation and what the drivers are for the parking complaints, and then focusing the data collection on those days or times of year or whatever when it's an issue. The goal here is to make sure that we're not putting restrictions in when they're not needed, and they may only be needed certain days of the week or certain seasons of the year, that sort of thing. So we need to collect the information, and it changes depending on the situation. What's driving that demand and the request, and then we'll collect the data during those periods and determine if the thresholds are met and if the resident only restrictions are warranted.
Are those criteria besides 67%, are those criteria spelled out to whatever neighborhood is wanting to apply?
Yes, it's in the policy, and we direct any inquiries to the policy and to the petition form.
And so who makes the final decision on that? Is it a committee, a staff committee? Does it come back to council?
On the, Mr. Ono, do you want to?
Ono?
Your worship, that decision would be made by the transportation staff. So it's delegated to the municipal engineer, but through the municipal engineer's office, it goes to the transportation staff. So it's really administrative procedure, and it's meant to be a very technical analysis of basically parking occupancy. And as Ms. Chevalier mentioned, it's tailored to what drives that parking demand to warrant whether or not the parking restrictions are needed. And it's a very, very common practice, whether it's in the city of Vancouver or the city of North Vancouver, city of Richmond, very similar policies and practices are used. And it's just really a technical, objective way of balancing the use and demand and the interests and goals in the community. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm torn because I've been listening to the Blue Ridge Community Association meetings and what's happening up there, and it's mainly the extra traffic that they're getting at the trailheads. But you'd be amazed. It's not just that people are fighting over parking spaces and going round and round and round like they do in Deep Cove, but it's people. I get people blocking people's driveways, and I know that you can call on that and call bylaws or call the RCMP. but they block driveways, they drive over lawns, things like that. So I have empathy for those people that are trying to get an RPO on their block because they're right in the line of all this increased traffic that's coming to the North Shore, not necessarily local residents. And so I'm on that side. And then on the other side, I think sometimes the RPO is too restrictive in some areas. So that's why I asked those questions for clarification. I appreciate your answers, and I think it's a matter again of balancing between the two. But you mentioned the City of Vancouver. City of Vancouver now wants to charge everybody for just parking on the street, and there's a huge pushback on that. So again, I just think that we need to be sensitive to the neighbors that need this, and also at the same time, we need to be sensitive that we're not getting too restrictive. So I hope that those criteria that you have, and when you look at them, that you're very sensitive to both sides of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I wanted to direct our attention a little bit to the situation in Blue Ridge and Hyannis and Berkeley because I know it well, and I want to better understand how our policy fits in with respect to the potential solution there. And I'm not personally affected by the situation at Hyannis and Berkeley because I live 3 or 4 blocks away, and where I live, there isn't the traffic problem, but I drive through and I see the situation there, which is people coming from all over the Lower Mainland, parking at the trailheads and creating a difficult circumstance for the residents there. And it would seem to me, and I could define more about what that difficulty is, but suffice it to say that I often see situations of disruption when I drive through, particularly on weekends, but even on weekdays now, I see situations of disruption that just aren't fair for people who live there in terms of the disruption of people parking and the congestion right in front of them. And it would seem that the solution is some kind of resident-only parking right around the trailhead so that the people who own their homes around the trailheads can have a peaceful enjoyment of their property and live in a residential setting. And then to make some kind of parking available for others elsewhere. And I have some ideas about that, but I don't think we need to get into it now, except to say that I think there are solutions that can be found. But I guess my question is, are we just leaving it to this petition solution? Because I don't think it is a situation that can be solved by just individual streets. And perhaps I'm putting forward Hyannis and Berkeley as a bit of an example because there must be others around the district. It's just one that I know well. So are we just leaving it then to the residents to come forward with their petitions, the 2/3 majority of each street, or are we being more proactive in considering what could be done to protect the livability of some of these circumstances, some of these locations, and provide for alternative parking for those that are coming in? Because I know in the Blue Ridge area, we welcome people from all over the community, all over the Lower Mainland. We like the fact that they're coming and enjoying our trails, but the right to enjoy our trails isn't the right to not destroy, but interfere with the quiet enjoyment of some of these homes that live near the trailhead. So I just raised that. It's an issue that I know well, and I did want to bring it forward and see what our thoughts are in terms of the policy and how we might go about addressing this. Thank you very much.
Ms. Chevalier.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. I can take a stab at that one as well. And yes, we know the Blue Ridge area well and empathize with the crowds of people that are accessing the trails. There's a number of things that are happening that will help to address that. In the short term, Parks is opening, if they haven't already, Blue Ridge Park with some additional spaces and wayfinding and porta potties there, which will help. In the past 6 months, we've added some signage that's needed for any kind of safety concerns. So making sure that nobody's blocking hydrants or preventing emergency vehicles from going around. And then I think a really important piece to this is the Seymour Trail strategy that is being undertaken this year. And so we're hoping, we're expecting that trail strategy will look at the access to trailheads, and that will be a big, I guess, very informative as to taking into account how people are going to access these popular trails. So we think that's an important piece. The other thing I would say is we don't just rely on the petitions, but the petitions are a very important part, because not everybody on a street wants the restrictions, right? So we need to make sure there's a certain level of support, or else it's just, going to be the most vocal. And in fact, we, for Hyams Point, for example, and actually that whole area, we haven't received any petitions yet, although we've encouraged them to demonstrate support so that we can look at it more closely. And we think that some of the concerns are either that people want space in front of their house to park their own vehicles or for their visitors, and they don't want to buy the passes, or they don't want the signage that goes along with these restrictions. So again, it's just about being fair. We want to make sure we have that support if we're going to go down that route. And then, yes, it does come with signage and the need to purchase the passes, which isn't necessarily what everybody on the street wants. So.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson, were you completed with your comments? Oh, you've just muted yourself. Sorry.
My apologies. Just following up a little bit with the Seymour Trail strategy. I mean, I think there's a concern in Blue Ridge, as I'm sure there is in other communities, where we're talking about improving the trails, that we're just going to be bringing more people, and that in fact, for those who live at the trailheads and who bought their homes in good faith thinking they could raise their families in this location, circumstances are only going to get worse. So I just, if I could drill down a little bit on that, how is the Seymour Trail strategy, which is going to take some time to complete, of course, but how's that going to offer any kind of relief to this particular situation for the homeowners? Thank you.
Mr. Ono, you have a response?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so to the first question about whether or not we would just be relying on the petition process, I think to add to what Ms. Chevalier said, what we envision is an integration between the Seymour Trail strategy and those trailheads, access points, and coming up with a cascading series of options for access and parking. So, long ago, about 20 years ago, the Frome Alpine Trail strategy resulted in a fairly large study that looked at which trails to use, where the access points were, and then resulted in shorter term implementation of the resident parking only north of Coleman, which in a lot of ways is seen as unfair by people that don't live north of Coleman, right? And the district then spent some funds to build one of two proposed or potential parking lots, so the one on Mountain Highway further up. So that would be one lesson to be learned. In that case, the balance was tipped towards livability for the locals. In another fairly recent lesson, the Deep Cove dialogue occurred. So that was much more recent, probably 2014 or 2015 or so. And all the different users of wanting to park in Deep Cove, especially on a seasonal basis, and especially park along Panorama Drive in order to access Quarry Rock. Through that dialogue process, there was a balance sought to allow visitors to still come to Deep Cove and park, but also for the residents to have resident parking only, and the water access people to have access some of that resident parking only along Panorama Drive. So that was another set of direction that was provided by council on where to find the balance between locals and their livability and visitors still having the opportunity to visit. And so what I'd envision for the Seymour Trail strategy is something similar. There's going to be a lot of dialogue that has to occur, and council will have to weigh in at some point on where you want the balance point. Do you want it to really become restrictive, like the Coleman, north of Coleman example for Frome? Or do you want to continue, as Councillor Hanson just mentioned, to allow residents to come and visit and partake, visitors to come and partake of the trails, but then where do we put those access points? And it's a little more complicated on Seymour because there's multiple land owners, right? So we have, I think the Tandem Mortgage and Housing Corporation with the Rifle Range lands, and we have the province with the provincial park, and of course there's us, and then there's also some access through Metro Vancouver lands as well, so through the Seymour Conservation Area. So it'll take some time, but we have to integrate that with then the street side regulations, resident parking only versus parking lots versus possibly time restricted parking, or who knows, possibly even some pay parking, Your Worship. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. My comment will be brief because we've had a pretty good discussion on this, I think, and we have discussed it recently. But just to say that I'm glad we have this policy in place now. But I appreciate the ongoing challenges that staff have in trying to balance these different user groups, as you say, Mr. Ono, between residents and between visitors. I certainly hear what Councillor Curran is saying as well. And, when we're talking to residents who would like the exclusive right to park on their street at the exclusion of everybody else, but they're having a tough time paying $30 a year to have that right, then we're having the wrong kind of conversations with the community, I guess, or we have a long way to go. So just can appreciate that this is a good policy, and I think it heads in the right direction. But there's obviously, as our parks are becoming major draws for people from across the region, and we welcome more visitors, then we're going to continue to have these ongoing conversations. But I'm glad that we have this policy in place now, and I will be interested to hear on how some of the pay parking is going to once we have a little bit more data there. But thank you very much for the update.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bond, please.
Thanks, Mayor Little. I will just add one comment to what Councillor Hanson said about parking in Hyannis area in Blue Ridge. I think, like was mentioned by staff, the Seymour Trail strategy will have a lot of impact there. At least I think short-term impacts. Long-term, we'll see how trends of outdoor use continue to grow, I think. But in the short term, I think there's a lot of good from looking at, even perhaps before the strategy is fully completed and implemented, looking at some ways to spread out the user load across Blue Ridge. I know, the Hyannis area is popular with all types of trail users, whether it's dog walkers or hikers or runners. It provides access to a lot of different points along there. But for bikers, there's actually a lot more access on the east side of Blue Ridge to a lot more of the popular trails, the popular climbing trails. So there's probably, places like at Northlands, the overflow from McCartney Park, places even at the east end on Hill Drive, there's access on Hyannis and along the eastern parts of Blue Ridge that don't typically see the concentrated load that Hyannis and Berkeley does. There's probably an opportunity right now to start looking at options to encourage and promote those who are traveling or biking up to the top of the hill to look at other places to stage from, instead of everyone kind of congregating Hyannis. So that was obviously spreads the load out, introduces new areas or other residents to the challenges of parking and having more people coming and going from in front of their homes, but could provide some temporary relief to those who have been dealing with it for a lot longer and dealing with more intense impacts. So just a brief comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Kern.
Gonna try this again, but it's just getting hotter. I'm just warning y'all. Okay, so I think what I really want to communicate is that we need to embrace complexity and have critical thought about this. Like, I totally understand that it is challenging. I live in Deep Cove. I work in Deep Cove. I recreate in Deep Cove. I completely understand the challenges. I'm not unsympathetic, and I understand the challenges of a community where there's few sidewalks, cars have been always prioritized, it's difficult to get around, and there's too many cars. I mean, that's the problem that we're trying to solve for always. I just want to recognize that anytime we're talking about parking, it's the end. You know, cars are parked the vast majority of the time, not in motion. And so I want to be forward thinking about these policies and really acknowledge that they are Band-Aids. Like, we're never going to, with the status quo, we're always going to be here. And it's probably going to be 50 degrees the next time we have this conversation. And then we're really not going to make any sense. But I guess the point is, I want to have that bigger conversation with people about how we use space. I want to look at this long term, but I'm not unsympathetic to